Hi everyone, Luz Gonzalez here, and this is my friend Matt. Matt Goran, you are a financial advisor at
That's
Fiduciary, and you guys know me hopefully from the videos and from Facebook posts. All right, so today we're going to be talking about budgeting. We posted this really long video. Hopefully you watch it. It has some really great information. But for this video, we're going to do about 2-3 minutes just talking about budgeting and some of the best practices for budgeting. So Matt, take it away. When we think about budgeting, what should we be thinking about, and what are some of the best practices that you recommend for people?
Yeah, I think the best practice is one that actually works for you. There's a few different ways you go about budgeting, but find the one that you can actually stick with. If you don't stick with the process, you're going to end up with some bad outcomes for yourself.
Okay.
So the three big different types that I think about are one that I call penny pinching. You're actually going through and seeing where every single expense goes. Another one that I call the bucket approach or envelope approach, where you've got goals for yourself and you're
That's the
funding.
one I like.
That's Luz's favorite. You're finding these goals that you like and you're funding them every single month. And the other one that is my preference is what I call heuristic accounting, which is a very fancy way of saying simplify your finances as much as possible so that you don't need to think about money so much. And each of these approaches has their own pros and cons, but again, it's find the one that really works well for you.
Okay, so it's 1,
Penny pinching.
2.
The buckets approach or envelopes approach, and the third is the heuristic accounting. So the penny pinching approach is something that most people are probably familiar with instinctually. It's the one that
This is where you're tracking every penny. Every
Right.
time you spend something, you're tracking it. I had this system where every time I made a purchase, I would put it in my phone in this app, so
Right.
a little bit like that.
Exactly. So when most people think about budgeting, this is the approach that they think about. And it's every time you get a coffee, you go out to eat, anything like that, you're writing that down, you're plugging that away. Mint, Personal Capital, LearnVest, and some other websites can help people to automate the process a little bit, but the idea is the same. Keep track of every single expense. And a pro of this thing is that you know really where every single dollar is going. You know if you're spending too much money on coffee, too much money on food. You're aware of every single expense. That's really the strength of this thing. But I think there's a few downsides for it, which is why I don't often recommend this approach to most people.
What are they?
One of the biggest downsides is that it is so hard to actually pay attention to all of these expenses all the time. Most people, if they're keeping track themselves, are going to get a little lazy. They're not going to keep track in that Excel spreadsheet of every single expense. And if you're not keeping up with your budgeting system, why even have one in the first place?
Yeah.
So because of its complexity, I don't recommend it to most people. And another problem that I have with it is that it is descriptive and it's not proscriptive. Descriptive meaning you know where all your money is going, but proscriptive is the idea of knowing what you should be doing with your money. And just because you're keeping track of everything doesn't mean you actually are managing it very well. And that's what brings us to that second one, the budgeting or envelopes
My
one.
favorite.
This is what Luz likes quite a bit. The idea here is that you have some goals that you've laid out ahead of time, and you want at the beginning of the month to fund those goals. You're going to go to Fiji hopefully soon.
Yeah, so these are categories. So the way that I like to think about them, I have my core obligations and then I have non-core obligations. So when I think of core obligations, I'm thinking of rent, food, basically rent and food. These are core things. And then when I'm thinking of non-core, I'm thinking of shopping, I'm thinking of entertainment, I'm thinking of these other things. My friend has Starbucks as a non-core, potentially core, definitely
Loyal
not core.
customer.
Yeah, loyal customer. But it's helpful to know right now, how much money do I have in this bucket? And what I actually did is I bootstrapped this system where I actually have these buckets. So with my credit union, and in the long video we talk about credit unions and how they're different from banks and some of their benefits. So I have these 10 checking accounts and 10 savings accounts, and so when I'm pulling my money, it's actually coming from these buckets. So when money is pulled from my rent bucket, it's coming from the rent bucket when it goes into the rent. So it's really helpful for me. I love being able to know right now, if I look, how much money do I have left over for food? How much money do I have in my rent bucket? How much money do I have in my Fiji bucket? How much money do I have in my saving for a car bucket? And so it works great for me.
Right. And so I think, as you can see with your passion of talking about
Yeah.
this, it's find the budget method that works for you and
Yeah.
then stick with it. And it's very much working for Luz. So some of the pros of this thing is that you have these goals that you can fund, and you know not to spend too much on food, and you know that Fiji trip or that new car, whatever your goal is getting funded, and you can have a sense of when you can actually accomplish that goal.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really important things for a lot of people. The downside to this method is, in my view, it's a little bit inflexible. So in 1 month, if you want to spend more on food for whatever reason, do you allow yourself the flexibility of doing that?
Although I'm gonna push back there. I think this whole like bucket system allows me to say like, okay, this month I didn't spend anything on entertainment, so I'm gonna take that like $100 that I wanted to spend on that fancy restaurant and move it over into my
Right.
food bucket.
Sure.
And like, so it allows for that. But like, at least I know I'm not going over my means, which is what's important to me, to know
Sure.
that I'm not gonna like,
Right.
I'm not gonna touch my rent money. I'm not gonna touch some of these like bills money.
Right.
These basics that I have to cover. But then for the other things that are like non-core, I could move things around. So
Right. So
Just
again,
my thought.
if the system works for you, what I've seen with some people is that they find quickly that they haven't allocated the right amount of money every month to these buckets to begin with, so that they stop doing it within the first 3 months or so as they start having to move money around
Interesting.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
But again, stick with the system
Yeah.
that you devised for yourself.
and the third one,
So the third one is what I'm calling heuristic accounting, and this comes from the idea that if you look at the literature on how people handle their money, most of us would think intuitively people are very bad with handling money, and that is true if you think of very long-term goals like retirement. That's really hard to plan for. It's true if you're thinking of very complicated financial systems like the one that we live in right now. But if you're thinking about really simple things like if I've got so many berries in my hand because I'm a hunter-gatherer 2 million years ago, and I need to make sure that these berries last me to the end of the month, people are actually really good about managing that kind of resource. So how can you set up your financial life in a way that makes it so the only decisions you have to make are those relatively simple ones, and everything else is handled for you automatically?
and this takes us to automate, which is really important. To the extent that you can automate anything in your savings, in your budgeting, and anything,
Yeah.
we highly recommend that.
Right. Thoreau says simplify, 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 and I think that applies very much to finance. So how does this system work? How do you get to that point where all you have to think about are the berries in your hand, so to speak? And the way that I talk about doing this is to think about what are your wants and what are your needs, and how many of those wants and needs are fixed. It's something you have to spend every single month, and you know that you have to spend, or year or whatever. It's a fixed thing that happens all the time. And how many of them are variable, where you can't really expect or predict when these things are going to happen. If we think about our fixed needs, that might be something like paying rent. It might be how much you spend on food every single month. Try to get those things as low as you can without really sacrificing your core quality of life. And for things like fixed wants, like how much you're spending on cable, or if you've got a car that you really don't need, you don't use very often, that's not a need anymore, it's just a want. Those things, those fixed wants, eliminate those entirely. And most people would think, if I eliminated something like my cable bill, my quality of life is going to go down. Trust it. Trust the research on this stuff. Trust the people who've been living this way. Those fixed wants don't actually improve your quality of life. They don't actually make you happier. Get rid of those things, and your budget is going to get freed up quite a bit. What about variable needs? What would be an example of that? You break your leg. You need to fix that, but it's not something you can predict. That's where insurance comes in. So make sure that you have proper insurance coverage. Make sure you have an emergency savings account that can cover the small
We'll talk about that in
emergencies.
a different video.
Yeah, and then the other ones are the variable wants, the wants that you didn't even know would come up. Maybe your friend is having a party, they're going away, they're going to move to someplace else. You want to go out and you want to be able to, break your budget a little bit and go and party with them. What about that vacation that might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Those sorts of things, be willing to spend the money on those things. That's really where your quality of life goes up. And if you've cut down your fixed needs, you cut your fixed wants out of your life entirely, you can spend the money. You'll get your financial life down to these little berries in your hand, and you'll know how much you can spend.
All right, so there we covered 3 potential ways that you can think about your budgeting. 1, penny pinching. 2, the categories, the buckets. And then 3,
heuristic accounting.
Heuristic accounting. All right, guys. Recommend that you watch the full video. We talk about a lot more things like investments, budgeting, savings, student loans, credit scores, all these things. But thank you for watching, and you can reach Matt at
mjgoren@gmail.com.
And you can just comment here or find me on Facebook, and happy to engage. All right. Bye, guys.
All right. Thanks so much.